Hello and welcome to the Lean Startup Webcast, a conversation with Kent Beck and Ries. We're waiting for a few more viewers to join the webcast. We'll start in just a few minutes. Hello and welcome to the Lean Startup Webcast, a conversation with Kent Beck and Ries. We're waiting for a few more viewers to join the webcast. We'll start in just a few minutes. Hi everyone, thanks for joining our webcast. Today we're pleased to present a conversation with Kent Beck and Ries. I'm Melissa Tinatigan, Executive Producer of the Lean Startup Conference, happening December 9 to 11. Visit leanstartup.co for more information. First, can everyone hear me? Great. Our speakers today are Kent Beck and Ries. Kent has been a consistent innovator in software development for 30 years. He currently works at Facebook, programming products and infrastructure, coaching, and studying software engineering. Ries is the co-host of the Lean Startup Conference, an entrepreneur, and the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Lean Startup. A few housekeeping notes. We'll take questions from the audience via the live chat. If you'd like to ask a question, please flag it by starting with a Q: before asking the question. The speakers will answer questions in the second half of the webcast. This is a 1-hour program, and the recording will be available a few days after this live webcast. Take it away, guys.
Oh, hey everybody. Welcome to another Lean Startup webcast. This time I am incredibly excited and quite proud, frankly, to have as our guest someone whose work has influenced me profoundly over the years and is also, I have discovered more recently, one of the nicest people you will ever meet in the business. I'm proud to say my friend Kent Beck. Yes, there's no one else coming behind you, Kent. That's you we're talking about. And just for those of you, I just realized on my shelf right here, I have my old beat-up copy of the first book of Kent's, but not the last that I read, Extreme Programming Explained. I always love the subtitle, Embrace Change. which I think of often when I have been in the work that I've done, because change really is the only constant. Anyway, Ken, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted. I do want everybody to know that Eric strictly refused to prepare for this conversation, so I have no idea what's coming. I may say things that I don't intend to say, and I think, frankly, I'm hoping that I can get Eric to say some things like that too. So we'll see what happens.
I bear
So,
full responsibility for this because here's the thing. We deliberately wanted to leave this webcast without much of a formal agenda because we wanted to keep it as casual as we could. Kent and I have a lot to talk about. And before we get to audience questions, I know a lot of you will have questions. I know one of the really fun things about the Lean Startup community is we have people from really different backgrounds who join. Among software developers, even professional software engineers, Kent really is one of those people that needs no introduction. But for a lot of people on this webcast, maybe don't know Ken as well. I think maybe we could start a little bit with your background. I think even for those of us who followed you for a long time, I'm really curious kind of your personal story. Like, how did you get into this line of work? You know, a lot of us know you as the creator of Extreme Programming, signatory in the Agile Manifesto. Looking back a little further, you know, one of the really advocates for design patterns and a lot of good software engineering practice going back a long time. So there was a time when you were just a regular old software engineer like a lot of us. And fast forward now, you're a software development luminary. Like, help us fill in some of that timeline in between. How did you get started kind of teaching and coaching people with these new concepts?
well, I'm not sure I was a regular software developer like you. I think I was worse, which forced me to develop habits to make up for my shortcomings. And then I noticed that those habits have wider application. Um, I was thinking about this in the run up, remembering some of my early days, and I can remember going to my first ever computer science lecture as a freshman at the University of Oregon, walking out of the lecture, which had been about formal proofs and how in the future software developers would only ever make 5 or 6 programming mistakes in their entire careers, and thinking, I am going to change how this is done. This just doesn't make sense to me, and so there I am at 18, knowing nothing about programming, and for whatever reason, that desire to have influence was already there. I mean, it seems incredibly arrogant to me now, and of course, since then I've gotten even older. But somehow that, like when things don't make sense to me, I just want to do something about it.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the practices that that you remember from that time that didn't seem right to you, and what were some of the early ideas you had about how things could be better?
Well, I had the good fortune coming out of school working in Tektronix labs where we had early versions of Smalltalk running, and in comparison to my experiences with in college with compiled languages and long feedback loops, we kind of had a contest to see how small the increments could be and how quickly we could get feedback on them. And we developed, this is working with Ward Cunningham, was my mentor at that time. We developed this kind of, in World War II, it was called the island hopping strategy, where if somebody had a strong point, you wouldn't land there, you'd go to the next island where nobody was, and just bypass big problems. We would do the same thing in programming. We'd have some big idea of what we wanted the programming experience to be like. And then if it turned out that that was really difficult, we'd just go around it and do something else. But all the time we were trying, can we get feedback in seconds instead of minutes, even for larger projects? And so I think that habit started then. I certainly didn't have it before then, but that habit of shortening feedback loops as an engineering activity. As an engineer, you're not just making the program, you're making the making of the program. You're figuring out, okay, what tools do I need to build? How can I get the feedback loops shorter? That's an engineering activity too, but it's not one that's ever covered in any kind of in any engineering curriculum that I've seen.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately.
Yeah, because you come out and it's not how fast you can get an assignment done. It's figuring out why the assignment's wrong and which half of it you should do and ship now. And like it's just the environment's completely the opposite. It's not cheating anymore. It's collaboration, and you get graded up for it instead of flunking. And yeah, so I had to go through a lot of those changes. But I had a fantastic environment at Tech Labs, a bunch of really smart people, and tons of MIPS. That's millions of instructions per second to you youngsters. And
you mean like what everybody carries on their iPhone now?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, exactly.
I couldn't resist.
Many megabytes, which is the one that's smaller than a gigabyte, and millions of pixels, which is still not all that different. That's the one. That's one that's always struck me. It's like I've got 1,000 times more memory and 1,000 times more cycle and 4 times as many pixels.
Yeah, it's that whole physics thing. So annoying.
Bus.
So kind of like a true software guy. I'm so with you. Okay, so
yeah, that's how I got started in being unconventional, I guess.
So I think a lot of people would have that experience and like really be satisfied that they found a new, a better kind of way to be a developer as an individual. But you felt the need to go further than that and actually start to codify some of those things and give it a name and evangelize it to other people. Like how and why did that occur to you? And for those that don't know extreme programming, can you kind of just give a little bit of that history too?
Sure. For probably the first 10 years that I programmed, I was in pursuit of virtuosity as a programmer. I wanted to just do a better job of programming because, after all, my projects will be more successful if I'm a better programmer. And it turns out that you can be a bad enough programmer to sink a project, but you cannot be a good enough programmer to make a project successful. So I quickly ran out of gas on projects being more successful. So I was forced to take a bigger, broader view of the context in which programming happens. And so I started paying attention to things that worked and things that didn't seem to make a difference or that actively harmed development. And I've always had the habit of being a contrarian, and if anybody states X is absolutely true, I always think what are the implications of not X? Like, just as a reflex, I always think that. So if somebody says, oh, you need comprehensive documentation for software development, I think, well, what if you didn't have any documentation at all? Would that really be a disaster? And I looked around in projects and it wasn't a disaster. So I thought, well, okay, maybe a commitment to communication is good enough. And the actual form of the communication is something that we could be a little bit flexible on. So as I went from let me be a better and better programmer to let me look at the context in which programming happens, I just collected this catalog of things that worked and things that mattered. And so when the time came when the CIO of a major corporation asked me to run a project, and I told her that I didn't run projects, and she explained that she was the CIO of a major American corporation, and yes, you're running the project. Then I named my price, and she said yes, and I said, oh crap.
Now you have to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I just figured I didn't have anything to lose. It was a failing project. I couldn't hurt it. The patient's already almost dead, so why don't I just take everything that I've seen that works well and crank it up as just as intensely as possible, and nothing else. Even though the nothing else included a whole bunch of things that every software engineering book would tell you you absolutely had to do, like have a QA department, or
Right.
have comprehensive documentation, or get your design right before you start coding, and on and on and on and on. So I just thought, well,
Sure, the exponentially increasing cost of change.
right. Yeah, that's just obviously true, except sometimes it's not. So how about if we make it so it's not,
Uh-huh.
and then act on that assumption?
It's one of the things I've first really liked about extreme programming and have really tried to do many times in my career is people assume that the the context and the tools and the infrastructure and the systems around you are immutable. And it's like, well, what's the best technique I can use given those systems? And what you just said really reminds me that those things are a choice. Like the cost of change, the cost of delay, the speed of feedback, the underlying cycle time of the tools that we use, we can make it those are not given to us by God. We can make a choice about them. And so if we want to spend $1, sure, we can of course always spend the dollar in making more features the old way, or we could spend that same dollar improving the yield we're going to get in our future development. Then sometimes that creates really interesting possibilities.
Right. And I think it's just a habit of thinking. Do you accept assumptions or do you challenge assumptions? And it's not a horrible thing to accept assumptions, but it's puts a big cap on what you can achieve.
So, given that you were such a contrarian, I was just kind of skipping ahead, but I got to ask: now that extreme programming has been, kind of subsumed into the word agile development, for better or for worse, and in a lot of ways, in so many parts of the world now, agile development is now considered itself an orthodoxy that's always right. How does it feel having practices that you pioneered, like out of a spirit of contrariness, like now having their own kind of religion around them and being perceived as a universal best practice?
So I'm trying not to edit my answer too much. So I'm a little sad because, like, everything has a context. And there's times when I don't write tests, and there's times when I don't refactor, and there's times when I don't pair program. And yeah, like all of those things have a context. So anybody settling for dogmatism is selling themselves short. And I wish better for my brothers and sister programmers than to stop thinking just when thinking could really have a lot of leverage. So that's part of it. Another part of it is just kind of a rueful acceptance that that's human nature and it's going to happen, and there's absolutely nothing I can do. That's not true. My responsibility in the situation is limited. I need to explain the things that I explain to the best of my ability, and that's where my responsibility stops. If somebody takes that and uses it as a club to hit somebody else, like just because I wrote the book and the book is used to hit someone, like, should I have not written the book? No, absolutely not. But it helps me to be clear about the boundaries. Like, where's my responsibility go to? Now, if I didn't explain something clearly, and then that's made it too easy to misinterpret it, and then that's used in a way, then I do bear some of the responsibility for that. But if I explain something to really, and I can't think of a better way to explain it at the time I explained it, I'm satisfied with that.
I think that's fair.
I mean, the same thing happens to you, right?
All the time. I ask these questions out of pure self-interest because, yes, people ask me, how come Lean Startup is such a religion? And why are your followers so dogmatic? And I have to be like, hey, I don't know who you're talking to, but I'd be happy to call them and explain that it's not a religion because you can't be excommunicated. That's not how it works. Plus, if we discover something new while we're practicing these approaches, then my point of view is the new discovery is immediately part of what we teach. Right. So what we know today, I hope, is just the tip of the iceberg because we are a science community. And so even if something was the best we could do a few years ago, if we haven't learned anything in the intervening years, then what a shame.
Right. There's something definitely wrong with that picture.
Yeah. So if we ossify and freeze it, then that's terrible. I'd be very disappointed.
Yeah, sure. And the irony is that talking to you about startup situations, like we've had conversations about this, about like this, about things that I was starting up, and I find you to be really flexible. It's as if you're reinventing lean startups from first principles every time. You never just give me a cookie cutter. It's never like, oh, you should do an A/B test. It's like, well, this principle pushes this way and this principle pushes that way, and then da 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 da, and here's a story, and so maybe something like this might be helpful. And it's as if you created something just for me in that moment. And that's like I feel that same way when I program at my best.
Hmm.
I'm not, I have the values and the principles in my mind, and I'm reinventing the practices from scratch. Now you get faster and faster at that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's right. You've gone down those alleys before, so you kind of know what the signposts to look for are. First of all, I take that as as high praise, a really huge compliment. So thank you. I do think like thinking about the work that we do from first principles really is the right way to think about it. Like as you said, there is no universally applicable tool. There's only tools that make sense in a certain context. And so if you can't, it's like memorizing formulas in a math class. If you fundamentally can't rederive from your first principles where those formulas came from, you're going to run, like they're useful still as heuristics, and every once in a while they'll come in handy, but you're more likely to cut yourself with the tool than actually make progress with it because you don't really understand how it works or where it comes from.
Right.
So we got a question from the audience, which is we were talking about the pitfalls of agile development, but they wanted to know, well, so what are they? I certainly my take, but I'll maybe let you go first and say what are some of the contexts you've seen where it can be challenging.
So I have a simple answer to this one, which is a values mismatch. So if you take extreme programming, which is founded on communication, simplicity, feedback, courage, and respect, if you're in an organization whose actual values, not the expressed ones, not the ones that are written on the back of the business card or the ones on the banner, but if
in
you
the
look at how
posters,
people behave, and you say, what are the actual values here? If those values are contradictory to the values underlying extreme programming, you're just going to be an annoyance. There's just no, like, you should not even do this. Like, keep doing things the way that you're doing, or work to change the values, because you'll be seen. You're going to be the one person who says, oh, well, I've spent 10% of the budget and I know that we're going to be late by a factor of 2. And everybody else is busy pretending that they're going to hit the date. Well, who's the problem around the table at that point? It's definitely the person who, isn't enough of a team player to say blah, 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 right?
But why are you being so negative? If you weren't so negative, maybe we would hit the date.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been that guy. Oh, yeah. It's
And
really,
the
really
same's
fun.
true. There are organizations that actively discourage feedback. There are organizations that reward cowardice. There are organizations that reward disrespect. And if you're in one of those organizations and you're trying to do something whose absolute foundations is the opposite of that, it's just not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the questioner asked about agile development, I'll say one thing I've noticed, and I appreciate Kent being specific in his answer. And I think for those who only know agile through the broad definition, I encourage you, especially if you're in software, to study extreme programming specifically rather than agile in general, because quite a few of what are called agile approaches really don't have feedback as a value. So I would say that the context, certainly this is where I ran afoul with agile before I had really studied it, which is that when you're in a situation of high uncertainty, a lot of agile approaches still fundamentally believe that you have a product owner or an in-house customer who will give you an authoritative answer as to what needs to be built. And in a lot of startup situations, there is no authoritative answer as to what needs to be built because nobody knows. And so the poor product owner is sitting there prioritizing stories as best they can. But I always ask the question to agile teams that I meet, how do you know that this product owner is prioritizing correctly? Or more importantly, how does she know correctly, and what kind of feedback is she getting about whether that prioritization decision that was made in the past is correct today? In most cases, the answer is no feedback at all, and we're just acting on faith. So that, I think, is a tremendous weakness if you try to just apply that general approach without really an understanding of the context of the level of uncertainty that you're in.
Yep.
Go ahead. Yeah, please. No.
I was just going to say that you can always generate more feedback. You can generate too much feedback, but that's a really good kind of problem to have. So having that second loop of learning, which is how can we learn faster, not just what have we learned, but how can we continue learning faster? I think that's, for me, that's an engineering task, or it's partly. As an engineer, if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job.
A lot of people are asking us in the question just if you want to make a comment on Eric Evans's concept of domain-driven design, good or bad, but maybe just more open to comment.
Sure. I've known Eric Evans for a long time, and I think he's a both smart and wise person. I think anything that he writes is worth reading and thinking about. This is maybe another example. You have your orthodoxy, I have mine, or you have your orthodox followers and I have my orthodox followers, and I think Eric Evans has his orthodox followers, for whom domain-driven design is really a comforting retreat to designing first and then implementing later, which is a longer feedback loop. Like, in principle, it's just the wrong direction, but it's human nature to go back to things that are comfortable. So I think I try and separate in my mind. I don't think that's what Eric wrote, and I don't think it's what he meant, but I separate in my mind his ideas and the ideas as practiced by the community.
Totally. So I'll stop asking biographical questions in a second, but I got to know, when we first met, my image of you was basically living like in a monastery in rural Oregon, on a farm, like the mysterious coding monk. And then next thing I know, you're working. So what's that been like to make that transition into Facebook? And can you talk a little bit about what you're doing there?
Sure. Yeah, I had 2 kids in college at one time, and I needed a little bit more stability in my life. Also, something about being a consultant is that you're never really part of anything.
Yeah,
you're not part of the group, and it's the saddest thing in the world to have a really successful engagement as a consultant and be getting on the plane and know that you're going to lose touch with those people, but they're going to be rocking it together for months and years, and you don't get to be part of that. And that got old for me also. So part of it was just wanting more of a feeling of belonging, and part of it was just needing more stability in my life. And then background, the task that I've been working on probably for 10 or 12 years now is trying to understand software design. I think there was wisdom that the ancients had that we've collectively lost and needs to be regained. Where the ancients are people like Larry Constantine and Ed Jordan. Sorry, guys, but and so going to Facebook was an opportunity. It's a laboratory. It's really smart people working on unprecedented problems at ridiculous speed. And so I get to see this hothouse of software design. I get to see generations of technology that last 6 months instead of lasting for 6 years. And so I can see many more cycles through the loop of how software evolves, how innovation disperses in a community, and so on. So that part was a big draw for me and has played out. Then once I arrived, I was absolutely addicted to shipping software that 1 billion people use. That's just unspeakably cool to do that on a daily basis.
I know you're going to talk about this some at the conference, but what are some of the aha moments? Anything you want to share? Things that you feel like you've really learned from being in that environment? It sounds amazing.
Well, I had to discard my assumptions going in. It was this back to first principles. There's a Facebook way of doing things, and the degree to which I said, oh, well, here's how I do things, let me apply it in the Facebook context, I just got it was tons of friction for me and for other people. Reviewers would look at it and say, "Why are you doing this?" Oh, well, because that's, I'm the Kent Beck, and this is how the Kent Beck does these things, and you can just call me the. But so I had to, like, it took me several weeks to just like, okay, no, I am fresh out of school. I don't know anything about programming. I'm going to program here like I see the people around me programming and try and get good at that, and then add in the things that I think I already know. That was a
Mm-hmm.
shock. That was really hard. Um, and but in the end, it's a fantastic education. I think I'm a much more well-rounded programmer now than I was 3 years ago when I joined. Um, I prototype faster. I'm more aggressive in a lot of ways than I had ever been before. And I can still make steady progress and have clean code and whatever. But other aspects of my engineering have gotten a lot better in the meantime.
That's very cool. Man, I wish everybody who took a new job, new software job or otherwise, would approach it that way. Learn how
It's
things are
hard.
now, and then learn how they can be improved versus coming
It's
in with
just
your.
so hard. You come in, you're the agile guru and you're going into some place and they have a 6 month deployment schedule, and the first thing you want to do is chop it into 1 month chunks, and you should do at least one and probably two of those 6 month cycles before you open your yap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
you might be surprised. You might learn something.
yeah, absolutely.
I think it speaks very well of you. Okay, so I feel like I've been playing Inquisitor too long here. So what do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm curious about this balance, and I think you and I are maybe outliers on this. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we're both makers. We like the satisfaction of creating a piece of software or a physical thing or a good dinner or whatever it is. Like actually making something is really attractive and brings us both satisfaction. And yet we both seem to measure ourselves on influence instead of being able to point to I made that and that and that.
I know.
Where does that come from for you?
Yeah, it's very frustrating. I mean, I think that I would have been very happy. I thought I would be really happy when I was younger. I was convinced that programming was the most fun thing I would ever do, and I'd be very happy to program increasingly large systems myself. And I think basically what happened was I kept doing that and not having the kind of impact that I wanted to have. Because like in my fantasy, I could produce a massive program that's used by billions of people and has enormous complexity and is incredibly innovative by myself, just with my bare hands. But the truth of any program is, uh, it requires teams and customers, and it's like this complicated ecosystem. So like, every time I've actually tried to do that, like the person who's considered the founder or the person who like created a complicated system, it doesn't matter if it's Linux or Facebook or anything. Like somebody had to plant that initial seed, and that's very satisfying. But in order for us to have remembered it and to care about the fact that they are the founder of that thing, they had to do an incredible amount of management of people to get them to grow that seed into something that is significant. And what's frustrating to me, it was then and it still is, as soon as I became a manager of people and a team leader and an architect and really like thinking out how to do that stuff, like I was doing human systems engineering and not like I was no longer making things with my bare hands. And so like I've always had that frustration that's both very frustrating, but also of course very satisfying. I'm very proud of the things that the teams that I work with built. And I think that for me anyway, the transition from being a team leader to whatever it is that I do now is super clear to me. But like to try to like cultivate this community and share a set of ideas on a wider scale, that was actually a much easier transition than going from an individual contributor to a team leader. Because to me, it's like as soon as I was not making things myself with my bare hands, it's all about, okay, well then what activities will give me the greatest influence to have the impact I want to see in the world? And once you start asking that question, it's very, I don't know, for me anyway, it's very easy to get away from making things and much more into helping other people make things. But I do miss the kind of hands dirty implementation too. So I don't know if you feel that way too.
Well, I'm
It's
about
hard.
yeah, it is hard. It's like it's a change in value system, a change in how you view yourself.
Yeah.
I'm the person who makes things, and I'm the person who helps other people make things. So I shifted when extreme programming broke, about 99. I shifted to full metal guru status
I
for
love that.
about 10 years. I made that up just for you just now. You're welcome.
Everyone should
So
use that from now on. That's an awesome phrase.
so I was really, write the book, fly around, give the speeches, and I burned out on that pretty hard. But I didn't know what to do. And about 6 years ago, maybe, I had a really programming project. Somebody just said, go program this thing. And I got into it in 3 days. I did amazing stuff and, used all my knowledge and whatever. And it felt so good that I've where I am now is that I balance my time between the two. So I have really specific projects that I program on, test, code, refactor, deploy, look at data, just the whole really that thing. But probably half of my day is spent coaching. And while I would like to have impact across all of Facebook engineering, I want to be realistic. So I do my coaching. Most of my coaching is really one-on-one. I give tech talks, and everyone's very active on internal Facebook groups and conversations about stuff. But really, half of my day is spent pair programming with young programmers. And
Man,
fortunately,
that should be on the Facebook perks page for why you should want to go work there as a young programmer.
you should go through the process before you say that.
It certainly
So
sounds good.
some days I'm nicer than others. Let me just put it that way. And
But always
fortunate,
effective, I believe.
yeah, fortunately, young engineers haven't invented new ways of wasting time. So it takes me a little while sometimes to start doing the pattern match, but then I can say, oh, yeah, when I'm like this, here's what I do.
Yeah, maybe you want to
And
try this out.
here's the pieces of paper by my desk so I don't forget things and I stay focused and blah 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 blah. And let's try this and let's take this. It's in some ways it's really just the same kind of wasting time mistakes that I make. So I get this combination of influence and really making time. And boy, I come out at 2 or 3 hours of just head down programming, and I feel fantastic. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to have found a balance between the two.
Oh, that's really cool. One of the funny things, you'll appreciate this, in the last year especially, my work has been increasingly with industrial companies far away from software. So I've had a chance now to work on, combined cycle power plants and healthcare devices and just like really nutty stuff, cars and hardcore physical devices, very different material science type technologies from software. So much so that I was working with a company, an industrial company, and they had me talk to one of their software teams. And they were like, what does this guy know about software? All he knows is all industrial. Sure, they're like, obviously Lean Startup will work for my industrial products, but how could it work in our really difficult ERP implementation? I swear to God. And it was really fun to get back. I realized it's been a while since I actually sat down with like a real hardcore, like, I do a lot of consumer internet type startups and that stuff. Always people come to my door all the time, but like sitting down with a big old school Oracle, ERP implementation, accounting, payroll, that kind of stuff, and being like, oh, right. I was weird to have some domain expertise to come in and talk to them about it, and they were still doing it old waterfall style. So it was really interesting to come in and say, okay, if your company's going through a lean startup transformation and that's happening on the product and new product development side, what's your excuse on the IT side to stay mired in that old way? Like, don't you want to keep up with what the rest of it? Was just funny to see IT as a lagging function, like having to be taught about the importance of innovation when usually it's the other way around.
Yeah.
But yeah, when someone told me, what do I know about software, I was really happy. That was a great day.
Sit down, son. Are you getting old enough to call people son yet?
No, I look even younger than I am, so I go into these industrial companies. They're like, "Why is this kid lecturing us on whatever?" I have to get over it
Uh,
every time, but I
I,
don't have
I
to.
I gotta say it already always pissed me off when some old guy would say son, or I've been doing that since before you were born. It
Yeah,
is immensely satisfying to say that.
I look forward to it someday.
Mm.
Uh, all right, we're
Oh,
getting a lot of we're like a lot more audience questions. But what else, if you have other stuff you want to talk about before we get to them, I thought it was a great question. So go nuts.
no, I think it's finding that balance. Like if everybody was just influencing everybody, nothing would
No,
get
no one would
done.
ever do anything. Oh, I totally
And,
agree.
and if everybody was just doing and doing and doing and not reflecting on it and talking about some things work better than others, then things would never get done any better. And so
Right.
there's clearly some balance to be struck there. And some days I think of it as a character defect that I want to measure myself. I want to be able to look around and say, you know, you see that rock star, I trained him. You know, you see that guy really
Yeah.
crushing it. You know, this woman over here, I trained her, and then she went someplace else, and now she's still crushing it. Like,
Hmm.
I find great satisfaction in that, and but part of me wants to just go program some more.
Well, then you
So,
could just sit in the cave and people would leave you alone. That's my favorite part of it.
exact, just me and the goats.
All right, we got a bunch of questions about healthcare.gov. How would you have managed it differently? And not to want to step in a political controversy, but you must have had some thoughts about it reading in the paper. It must be driving you crazy.
Sure, sure. And when they announced that it was $600 million down the drain, I just like that's a little bit of money. You know,
Yeah.
even if it's only two of my dollars, it's still a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Um, so I have my answer. I'm really interested in yours. So I'll answer, but then you have to answer
Okay,
too.
I'll answer too. I promise.
So it's not at all a technical problem because it's not a difficult technical issue. I have worked in life insurance. I've been advising a life insurance software company for 15 years. So I know a little bit about the domain, and it is unbelievably complicated. No question about that. That said, it's not that unbelievably complicated. There's just always exceptions to everything. And so none of the coding is ever going to be straightforward. But it seems to me like step one was sitting down with the Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership in the Congress and saying, is getting good health care to the American people more important than making political hay? If the answer to that is no, then the game's over. We're not going to do it. I mean, I wouldn't. There's if that's true,
Wow.
then there's just no way of making any progress. Now, I would want to make the answers as as clear and accountable and public as possible. Because if somebody wants to be narrowly reelected and doesn't actually care about the health care Americans get, that's information that a voter should know
Yeah.
for sure. But without that alignment, I mean, I was reading the history of healthcare.gov, and it's all, well, and then they wanted to do this, but the Republicans would have said that this was happening, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if this isn't a bipartisan project, both either side could have spoiled it.
Hmm.
And so until it's a bipartisan project, you don't do it, and you let everybody know who's gumming up the works.
Hmm.
I
Interesting.
don't know any. If you take as a given the political situation and the polarization and the intense balkanization of politics, where somebody wants to get reelected so badly, but their electorate is not going to forgive any step outside of the lines of the whatever the dogmatism, like you can't govern.
Yeah.
You can't govern the rest of the country, much less difficult, challenging IT project. So I think that would be my step one.
Yeah, okay, that's a fascinating answer because, of course, I mean, I'm a political junkie, and so I think about politics all the time. But then I also have a separate part of my brain that thinks about, IT procurement and how you build a project like this. And so you're crossing the wires for me, right? Even as we speak. To me, the word bipartisan ought to mean that you have a solution that takes advantage of the ideas of both sides, or that has popularity among the voters of both parties. If you define it only as you're able to get votes in Congress from both parties for something, you create this incredible and irresistible incentive to simply vote no, to deny whoever's in the executive the opportunity to have a bipartisan victory.
Right.
And I think that's the root of this political error. I mean, Obamacare is as conservative a healthcare reform as you're going to have, anyone propose in this country. And there was an opportunity, I think, for both parties to say, hey, let's take co-ownership of this. But a decision was made, not to do that. And I think you're absolutely right that created a very difficult environment to get things done in. But I guess I disagree that it made it impossible. And I'll point to just one counterexample, because to me, the great irony of healthcare.gov is that the current healthcare.gov that people are complaining about is actually the second version of healthcare.gov that was built. The first one was built right after the Obamacare law was passed. This is back in the time when Todd Park, who's now the U.S. CTO, was the CTO of the health department. And there was a provision in the law that said you have to create a healthcare.gov website, and you couldn't sign up for insurance in those days. It simply gave you information about the insurance options in your jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. But it was still pretty complicated. It still required a lot of cooperation from the insurance company. Like, there was a lot to it. And they did it exactly opposite of this current healthcare.gov in the three dimensions I think of as key. They put a small team on it, cross-functional small team. I think there was no more than 10 people. They gave them 90 days to deliver, and I think their total budget was so small as to be close enough to zero, like $1 million. Classic minimum viable product. Mm-hmm. They did it all open source. So from an ethos point of view, it was the opposite. And then from an infrastructure point of view, it was all cloud and modern, like you'd expect. And then they were able from that point to do the build, measure, learn thing, and to iterate and get feedback from insurance companies and from the public. And so they did that, like they turned that from a tiny little seed into a very useful, quite complicated project by gradually increasing its complexity in a highly polarizing political environment where everybody wanted Obamacare to fail. So what to me was deeply frustrating. Thanks to the president's creation of the post of the CTO and the CIO, he has really great people from Silicon Valley, from our communities, that could have been instrumental in creating this website, and those people were bypassed because of the IT procurement process in federal government, which is a nightmare. So, I have a diagram in the Lean Startup in the book that goes like this: accountability, process, culture, people, in that order. If something's going wrong, start with how are people held accountable, who pays money. So in the government, this is a procurement problem. Then it's a process problem. They did it waterfall instead of agile. That was pretty dumb. It's a culture problem. They use a proprietary ethos instead of an open source ethos. And fundamentally, it's a people problem. They had the wrong people working on it. So it's like four interlocking, complicated problems. But I feel like they could have done it differently, even facing all the hostility that they face, given they had basically an unlimited budget, a strong desire from the executive branch to see this work, and the right talented people around to advise them. If they had just done it that other way, I think it could have been a lot more effective.
Or even continued. It would be interesting to figure out that moment when the adults took over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfectly
you guys
working thing, but it's too simple. Thank you very much for getting it to this point, but now the adults will take over.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I wish that would never happen ever. So frustrating.
Well, that was a much more hopeful answer than mine. So thank you for that.
I don't get accused of that too often, so I appreciate it.
I feel better.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And actually, and to be fair, because I know we have some folks who are interested in Lean Startup in the public sector. There's some work that's being done at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. That's a brand new agency that was started up during the Obama administration. And instead of going outsource CGI, vendors, they have built all their technology expertise in-house, and they're doing a lot of really cool Lean Startup stuff. They have a much better software development process, and they're doing it in a highly polarized environment. So anyone who's interested, look them up. They're, I think, going to be a future very positive case study of how this can be done properly. assuming that healthcare.gov doesn't take the whole administration down.
Mhm.
Anyway, enough politics. We're supposed to be
Thank you.
talking about product development or something. I don't even know. But
And how to have influence.
yeah, and how to have influence. That's right. Well, so we've got a question here about and coaching teams. So the person says, how about the coaching aspects? How do you create those engagement loops, motivation, action, feedback in teams? And what are your experiences as a coach?
So I'd say I take a subtractive approach. I think that people by nature are interested and engaged and energized, and that there's lots of ways to screw that up. So if I'm talking to a team and they're not engaged and they're not energized and they don't have they're not bringing their full selves to their work, something's preventing that, and getting rid of what's preventing that is like thing one. So it's not a, well, you come in and you print the T-shirts and you add this and add that and the come up with the full-sized fluffy animal mascot suit, and I think that's entirely backwards. Not that I have anything against full-sized fluffy animal mascot suits, but there's a time and a place for it, and when things aren't going well, it's not the time to introduce it.
Uh-huh.
I remember one of the was a turning moment. I don't have quite the right word for it. I was giving a talk, a large high-tech company, and I tend to get pretty personal in my talks and talk about my own weaknesses and struggles, and sometimes that gives people permission to respond in kind. And this guy in a room with 400 engineers, this guy raises his hand and says, "Why do I have to turn off so many parts of myself in order to work here?"
Wow.
I choke up just thinking about it. It was a really hard question. Like, how do you answer a question like that? But if that's how he feels, like, number one, why are you sticking around?
Get out of there.
But let's say that you don't have options, and this is the only game in town, and you want to keep working there for whatever reason. Like, there's something about that environment. He wants to bring his whole self. He wants to be creative and energized, and he wants to use his emotional energy for good things, and something's blocking that. So how do we get rid of that? So for me, that's the number one thing. Is just let's find out, is it programmers aren't in touch with the customers, they don't have a sense that what they do matters. Let's get them on the line with the with a customer service rep, or let's sit them down in a coffee shop and have them watch people use the software that they developed yesterday. Is somebody going to yell at them for something that's not their fault? Well, let's figure out where that's coming from, and why is the person doing the yelling so afraid that they would act in such a counterproductive manner? Like, let's peel away the layers, get it back down to basics, and at the heart, a healthy project is people bringing all of themselves to a really short feedback loop, solving problems that really matter. So whatever part of that's not present, let's take stuff away until that's what we have left.
Mm-hmm. Goes back to that first principles thing we were talking about.
Yeah. And sometimes that will look like practices, and sometimes it'll be something that's never happened before and will never happen again. I like that. That's my approach in a situation.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I get called in. Now that I'm considered an innovation expert, whatever that means. I get called in now to meet these big companies, and a very common question I get is like, where do I find more entrepreneurial people? And I think what they have in mind is like, who do I fire, and how do I go hire some of those fancy, Mark Zuckerberg type kids to work for me? And in every company where I've actually had a chance to meet the people that work there, I'm like, you have tons of entrepreneurs who work for you, but they're not allowed to bring that part of their creativity and their self to work. You prohibit it through your own actions. And so if you want to fix the problem, look in the mirror. Now you're looking at the problem. Let's talk about how you as a senior leader can change your behavior to make, and of course, that's usually the last conversation we ever have because they're like, why am I hiring this
Exactly. I don't want to hear
report
that.
about how great I am. So the companies that have been willing to go down that journey and really look at their own behavior and systems and incentives and rewards. And again, that same pyramid, right? What do we do from an accountability accountability approach? Like, how do we hold teams accountable for results, right? If we hold them accountable to vanity metrics and trailing indicators and ROI, then that's going to cause a lot of dysfunction and bad behavior. Like, what do we do at a process layer? You know, what tools do we expect them to use? Like, are we prepared to let them experiment and use fast feedback? Or do we expect them to always have all the right answers up front and figure things out in advance? You know, the culture we have today is an artifact of the process decisions we made in the past. So if we have a bad culture, we got to think, okay, well, what are the ways we want to change that culture? And then what are the process interventions we can make to make those new cultural behaviors the default rather than the exception? And then once you've been through that whole thing, you say, okay, now we have a culture that can attract and retain really good people. If there's someone who's really not on board with that transformation, like maybe they're not the right person, but that's, you know, quite rare in my experience. It's like a lot harder than like just putting up posters that say everybody move fast and break things. As if like that posters.
Yeah, the posters are a consequence, not a cause.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I did hear. So at Facebook we have a lot of posters, and I heard we had a leadership consultant come in and talk to us, and he made a point that I thought was just brilliant, which is if you took the posters from any successful tech company and moved them to a different successful tech company, it would just look stupid. You know, if you take a move fast and break things and you hang it up in the lobby at Apple, like somebody's going to tear it down within seconds.
It would laugh in your face.
Because it just doesn't make any sense in that context. So we don't have the way, we have a way.
I love that.
And it works well. So one of the things that I was reminded of as you were talking about is inside of Facebook, people are judged on impact and not effort. And this is really uncomfortable. So my first review was a below average review, like don't get 2 of these in a row kind of review. And I thought, well, that feels really bad. I don't want to feel like that. And Sheryl Sandberg stood up in the company-wide Q&A the next Friday, said, well, some people got negative reviews and they don't like it. And that doesn't mean that this policy of measuring impact is wrong. She used a specific example, but think of any large tech company that used to be great and now is in the dumps. I'll bet people there got fantastic 5-star reviews the entire way down into the crater.
Yep.
So if you're not having impact, now you can choose whether you do low risk, low reward, you know, certain to have a small amount of impact, or whether you do something that's high risk of having a big impact, but then you're going to have to live through the lean times when you don't. That's a personal choice, but that was definitely something that it took me a while to, like, I don't get bad reviews.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So,
oh, God.
So it was a real wake-up call, and now I kind of like it because I can kind of tune the knobs to how much impact do I want to be certain of having versus, you know, do I want it so some of my time is just on crazy projects that are very unlikely to succeed, but if they are successful, like, you know, I go up another notch and have a really good time. So
yeah, I think for those who are listening in, that very simple statement that measure people on impact, not effort, is huge. And it's scary because I think people have a feeling that being rewarded for effort is somehow low risk. It's like gives them some career stability. It's like I followed the checks in the checklist, therefore I did a good job, therefore. And I know I appreciate you being circumspect and not want to name names, but when I'm working with companies, I'm very happy to name names. I'm like, oh, I see, got it. You're on the Nokia plan. That seems really low risk to me. Oh, the BlackBerry plan. I know that plan really well. The Kodak plan. So good luck with that. And you know, when you're out of work, because you implemented the Kodak plan, are you going to sit there and be like, well, that was low risk? Is that safe and high stability and got me promoted? I don't think so. That we don't live in a world like that.
Absolutely.
And it's cool. I feel like people actually resonate with that when you say, wait, is there, like, because I just think most people just haven't thought that there's any other way. They just, right. I was told, follow the checklist and that's how you get promoted and whatever. And to say, no, actually, there's a better way. And it's a fundamental waste of human energy and talent to have people working on things that nobody wants and that have no impact. Like, that's actually like morally wrong to have a system that does that. Could we expand our horizons to see that there's a different way? I find that actually very motivating for people.
Yeah. Yeah, and it certainly energized me and gave my creativity a boost, even though I found the transition difficult. But to bring it back around, I think that there are people who are looking for that safe way, whether it's the lean startup or extreme programming or Scrum, and they would like to have the steps. But there's good ideas in all of those, but in the end, it's what you actually accomplish with them that's going to make a difference for you, for your company, for society as a whole. As a way of honoring the gifts that you were given. So, looks like we're about out of time, unfortunately.
We're running out. Okay, but before we end, I want to ask you one last thing.
Sure.
I had to look it up because I remember when you came and spoke to us. What was it, 3 or 4 years ago now at the original Startup Lessons Learned conference? You had written what I thought was going to be like major news, and people were going to be like, the world was going to be rocked, and then I feel like it didn't get nearly as much attention as it deserved. An evolution of the Agile Manifesto. And I just want to read back to you what you wrote then to see if now that you've had a chance to think about it, now you've been at Facebook, like how does this still strike you compared to how it was a couple years ago? Did it seem right? And am I right that people should be paying more attention to this? And so I'm just going to read this to you. It says, team vision and discipline over individuals and interactions, and then in parentheses, or processes and tools, amen to that. Validated learning over working software or comprehensive documentation. Customer discovery over customer collaboration or contract negotiation, and initiating change over responding to change, which, thank God, is better than following a plan. So you wrote that, it looks like at least 3 years ago now. How's it feeling now?
I don't think, I would like to have done a better job of applying all those things. I don't see anything wrong with the direction, but I don't feel like I've lived up to them. But that's certainly my goal.
I think we can all agree with that sentiment, and that sounds like what's going to have to be a whole nother webcast sometime to talk about all the ways in which we've all fallen short and what we can do about it. But I think we're going to have to call it. We told people this would be about an hour, and that's where we are. Ken, I had a really good time. I really appreciate taking the time to do this. I can tell from the comments and on Twitter, people were having a blast. I think someone said from Uruguay to Argentina or something. We had people all over the world paying attention. So I just want to say thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Eric, for having me, and I really look forward to the conference. I think it's going to be a blast.
Oh, yeah, hey, I should probably be plugging the conference. Hey, don't forget that December 9th and 10th, leanstartup.co in San Francisco. If you want to come, we have 6 full days of stuff that you can do if you're really obsessive about it, or you can just come from the main conference, which is that Monday and Tuesday, December 9th and 10th. Kent and I will both be there along with a lot of other cool speakers. Check out the website, leanstartup.co, and we will see.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks to everyone for joining us today. This wraps up our show. Please join us again for the next webcast, Putting the Lean in Lean Startup, on November 18. In the meantime, visit leanstartup.co for more information on the Lean Startup Conference held on December 9 to 11 in San Francisco. Thanks, everybody. Bye.